Oh, his just ask if the cables.
Cable television, are we ready?
Yes, sir, we are.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. I am calling to order and reconvening a hearing of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. The subject is teacher and principal turnover and retention in the district, and Bill 24-355, Statewood Data Warehouse Amendment Act of 2021. The time is 3:49 in the afternoon, and we have one witness, the Chancellor Farabee, if he could be let in. This hearing is being conducted virtually, and it's being broadcast live on the chairman's website, www.chairmanmendelson.com/live. I believe it's also being broadcast on the council website, www.dccouncil.gov. This is the third hearing. This is a continuation of a hearing. And this is the continuation of the third hearing on teacher principal turnover and retention that I have held since being given oversight responsibility for public education. I don't recall that the previous education committees ever held even a single hearing on this important issue. In my view, there are a few key strategies we must pursue if we are to improve educational outcomes in the city. Reducing teacher and principal turnover is one of the most important. The others include budget stability in the individual schools, adequate resources to support at-risk and special education students, reducing absenteeism, focusing on literacy so that every child reads at grade level, and changing school climate. Teacher and principal turnover is costly. Each time a teacher or principal leaves, DCPS spends money to hire and train replacements. More importantly, turnover is costly as to educational outcomes. The stability of educators and school leaders is essential to school progress, and high teacher turnover negatively affects student achievement. We cannot grow high-quality neighborhood schools if the teaching workforce is constantly churning. Chancellor did not attend this oversight hearing when it was convened on October 25th, and because there were questions that only he can answer, because as Chancellor, he has responsibility for all of DCPS, I recessed that hearing, and today it reconvenes and continues. As I indicated in the letter to the Chancellor last week, your representative at the October 25th hearing is capable, but he is not responsible for the range of issues the committee chooses to discuss with you concerning turnover and retention. While I value working relationships, council oversight cannot be dictated to as to whom committees may call to answer questions on important matters. Matters such as the Chancellor's commitment to taking a fresh look at how we can update our performance evaluation system to ensure we are supporting all educators in all 8 wards through a comprehensive review of impact. Your commitment to conclude a collective bargaining with the Washington Teachers Union. Your response to teachers' complaints about over-testing and teachers' demands for flexible scheduling. And your intention as agency director resolving complaints about DCPS's Human Resources Office. These are all issues that you, Chancellor Farabee, are in the best position to answer. For today's continuation, Chancellor Farabee is the only witness. Because this is a continuation, the record will close as of the date I previously announced, November 8th at 5:00 p.m. We may still consider anything submitted after that date, but the cutoff record for the record itself is November 8th. And with that, we will have rounds of questions. I assume, Chancellor Farabee, you don't have a statement. If you do, you're welcome to give one.
Thank you, Chairman Mendelson. I don't have a statement at this time.
Thank you. So somebody should put me on a 10-minute clock. And since nobody's at the clock at the moment, Councilmember Henderson is here. Actually, before I start, maybe I should ask if you have an opening statement. All right, I'm going to start with asking about the teacher's contract. The teachers, and this is, in my view, important to the issue of teacher turnover, because a lot of teachers have testified they're very unhappy, and in part because they don't have a contract. The teachers union contends that a new collective bargaining agreement would help promote stability in the workforce. Do you agree?
I agree.
When the last collective bargaining agreement was executed in 2017, didn't DCPS and the Bowser administration hail it as significant in ensuring that DCPS is an attractive place to work, perhaps a better place than any other jurisdiction in our region?
Yeah, so our collective bargaining agreement, the fact that we are one of the highest paid school district nationally in the region certainly helps with recruitment and retention. I also share the concerns that our teachers have with our ability to reach an agreement. It's disappointing, in fact, knowing that we've made a generous offer to the Washington Teacher Union. It's my understanding that what we have proposed to the bargaining unit has not been shared with their members. I am confident, had that information been shared or will be shared with their members, that they will also see that as a very generous offer and responsive to the issues that the membership has raised to us and their leadership as well.
Collective bargaining agreements between DCPS and the teachers union typically cover a 3-year period. Yet the last contract expired in September 2019, over 3 years ago. Why shouldn't you be blamed for allowing this delay to languish?
Yeah, so again, we have been in negotiations with the Washington Teacher Union for some time. And there's areas where we made progress. As you know, we have not been able to reach an agreement. And again, as I stated earlier, I believe that what we have presented and is supported by the mayor is very generous and recognizes the hard work of our teachers and all of the members of the unit. And I also want to go on record to be really clear that DCPS, as a part of DC government, has shown the will and there's evidence that we can reach agreements and there is fair compensation and also working conditions for our employees. Most recently, you'll note that we were able to reach an agreement with the CSO, which was also very generous. And DC government has also had a number of agreements with other bargaining units. So we know it's possible. We've seen a record of that. We've seen a record of being fair. And again, I believe what we presented to the Washington Teacher Union is also fair. And I also believe that had they present that to their membership, I believe that their members would overwhelmingly support what we put on the table.
Now, the law states that collective bargaining for a given fiscal year or years shall take place at such times as to be reasonably assured that negotiations shall be completed prior to submission of a budget for said years. Now, if current practice follows past practice, there would be an agreement that would include several retroactive years. So reasonably shall be completed prior to submission of a budget for said years is past tense. Did the teachers union prevent you from doing this?
Well, the teacher union hasn't prevented us from making our offers and negotiating. We just haven't been able to reach an agreement. But I also want to be clear that there are some unique circumstances around this particular bargaining of the contract. One is we spent multiple months negotiating over a MOA, which was updated twice during the pandemic, that was related to health and protocols for health and safety during the pandemic, which resulted, again, in a significant amount of time that was used towards bargaining those MOAs. And we're thrilled that we've been able to keep our students and staff safe in that regard. However, since that, we've been actively engaged in negotiations and conversation, and even direct conversation between President Polk Lyon and myself. And I'm still very much so open to more conversation. I think if President Polk Lyons is the decision maker, and if she wants to meet with me or even the mayor, we are happy to put decision makers in the room and reach an agreement. But that has not been the experience that we've had throughout the process. There are multiple people involved in the decision-making process. And again, what we put on the table, we believe is very reasonable and fair.
Well, The bargaining is right now in arbitration. When did it go into arbitration? About a month ago?
So within the last week or so, we have received official notice of the arbitrator who is assigned to our particular case. You'll note that prior to it was in mediation, and it was in mediation for several weeks, and we were not able to reach an agreement. There is not a date yet set for arbitration, but it should be a relatively quick process, as we will have an opportunity to present our information along with the WTU.
Well, I asked about the arbitration because that's in the month of October. It finally goes into arbitration. So there's several steps that could have occurred. Negotiations, and I'm reading from the law, negotiations among the parties shall continue until a settlement is reached, or until 180 days after negotiations have commenced. That's like a couple of years ago. If the parties have failed to reach settlement on any issues 180 days after negotiations have commenced, then an automatic impasse may be declared by any party. If the mediator does not resolve the declared automatic impasse within 30 days, or any shorter period designated by the mediator, then the executive director, PERB, upon the request of any party, shall appoint an impartial board of arbitration. That's reading from the law. At each step, that is the 180 days after negotiations commenced, or declaring impasse, or exiting mediation and going to arbitration. At each step, DCPS could have forced the negotiations to move quicker. Instead, DCPS has allowed teachers to go over 3 years without a collective bargaining agreement. Why shouldn't you be blamed for allowing this delay to languish?
So DCPS has followed every step in the process. So I don't agree that we've been a barrier to negotiations. In fact, we've
I
been
didn't
quite
say a barrier to negotiations. I said at each step, DCPS could have forced the negotiations to move along. DCPS could have asked for impasse 2 years ago, because you're at impasse now. DCPS could have pushed for arbitration sooner than October of 2022. That's not being a barrier to negotiations. If anything, it's pushing them along.
Yeah, so it is our hope that we were able to reach an agreement. I thought that we were close. Both parties have been working together to reach an agreement. Unfortunately, we couldn't agree. I thought we were going to reach an agreement. And so that's why we stayed on the path that we're on. Once we reached impasse and determined that neither party was willing to bend any further, or there was a response to our last and best offer, then we decided it was best for both parties to go into impasse. And we follow all the steps in the process for mediation. And now we're moving to arbitration. My understanding that the proposed dates for arbitration are in December.
Well, the point I am feeling here is that the law allows for either side to move the negotiations along more quickly. Teachers are unhappy that they don't have a contract. That is contributing to teacher turnover, which is the subject of this hearing. And management could have forced a resolution of the bargaining 2 years ago. How often have you, the chancellor, personally participated in the negotiations?
I have participated in many, many conversations with the bargaining team and WTU leadership.
At the table?
At the table with their members. Now, what I believe is the most effective conversation that we can have in this negotiation process are conversations that I can have directly with their leadership, because we need decision makers to be at the table to reach an agreement. And I stand ready. I stand ready to meet directly with President Pogue Lyons if she has a proposal, or as I suggested earlier, I think the best approach at this point in time is to have the membership be aware and be briefed on our last and best offer, which is very generous. And I believe, again, the majority of their members would agree to.
Well, I've heard reports that you have not personally participated in very many of the bargaining sessions, the formal bargaining sessions. My understanding is that those meetings are weekly and that you've not personally participated in very many of them. How about the mediation sessions? How often did you personally attend the mediation sessions?
Yeah, so the mediation sessions are limited to individuals that are part of the legal team. And so we have not had a large number of individuals there, nor myself. We have our legal team, and then we also have representation from district government. But again, I am ready. I stand by. If President Polk Lines and her team and leadership wants to have a conversation and they have a proposal or they have a response to our proposal, I'm happy to meet.
Well, I think
Having meetings has not been the barrier. The
I think there's a
response to our
value.
proposal.
I think there's a value in you personally talking with leadership of the union, but I think there also is a value to you personally participating in the negotiations or the mediation sessions. I've also heard that the lawyers who are negotiating for management are not the same today as they were 3 years ago. So is that correct? That who's at the table has changed?
The people that are at the table from our end are relatively the same people. We did have some transitions on our team, but we do also have consistent members on our team that have been a part of the process. That's not the barrier. Again, I repeat, I think it's important for the community to know and you to know what we presented to the Washington Teacher Union is very generous and very responsive to the conversations that we've had with their members. I think the barrier here is if the members were be briefed on what's in the proposal. I am confident that what they would see and hear, they would be comfortable providing their support. And there's evidence that of the way in which we have reached agreement with other bargaining units in DCPS and in district government.
I'm going to turn to Councilmember Henderson, and there'll be a couple of rounds of questions. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Chairman Middleton, and good afternoon, Chancellor Fairby.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Henderson.
It's been a day, so I'm gonna try to get through this in one round. I first wanted to start by asking, what's the date that teachers are required to submit their DNIR without penalty?
I'll check with our team on the date. It is in the spring. We typically have that date, but I want to make sure I get the accurate date. So I'll circle back to you within the next couple of minutes.
Okay. In that regard, my next question was going to be, what's the number of DNIRs that have been submitted thus far this school year? I think it's April 1st is the deadline, but if your team could perhaps run you the numbers, because I think that would be telling. Let's see, school started in September. So I think we're in month 3 of the school year. The number of teachers who are already submitting their DNIRs now, I think would be telling.
So we have numbers from last year, and I think the summary there is we did have more vacancies going into the 22-23 school year. However, over the pandemic, we've been relatively consistent with the number of vacancies in our hiring. And we also have seen actually us perform pretty well in comparison to what we hear nationally with vacancies and hiring over the last school year. We started the school year about 3% of teacher vacancies, which is slightly up what we had in the past. But our team has provided the date in which you need to report your DNR is April 1st. That is for our WTU members, and it is March 31st for the CSO members.
What does turnover or vacancies look like specifically as it pertains to teacher aides and paraprofessionals?
Yeah, so the teacher aide number has been more significant than it's been in the past. We do believe that that is related to compensation. Compensation for teacher assistants and aides has significantly shifted throughout the pandemic as their roles have expanded. We have provided stipends to teacher aides for providing services in various roles. We have approximately 100 teacher aide vacancies as of today. But we're also in active negotiations with ASME, which represents our teachers aid, in the hopes that we're able to reach an agreement soon that would allow us to address compensation for our aides. We're working aggressively to be responsive to that. We actually had a negotiation session today. So I anticipate that will move fairly quickly and we'll be able to provide some additional resources for our aides as a part of
I'm glad to hear that you guys are moving on that to sort of deal with that compensation issue, because I think I raised to you a few months ago when you all did the increase for substitute teachers, that now we were at a point where you all were paying substitute teachers more than you were paying teacher aides, which, you know, if I could.
It's a great point, Councilmember Henderson, which is why one of the areas where we're providing additional compensation is additional stipends for teachers who sub as substitutes. So we want to be sure that they are compensated above and beyond individuals that are in the traditional substitute pool. And we have had a number of teacher aides support us in that way throughout the pandemic. And we're really grateful for those services. And that is also in place for this current school year as well. And we were able to reach that agreement with the ASME leadership to provide those additional funds.
Okay. I want to ask about impact, which is kind of crazy because I don't normally do this, but my staff shared with me the impact data trends memo that was on equity and bias. And I was struck by this. It says, in keeping with the commitment, this is on page 1 of the equity, it's called Equity Review Memo. And keeping with the commitment, DCPS examined impact data with an anti-racist lens. We are not surprised to see racial gaps persist within impact assessments. As we know, the systemic racism permeates virtually every institution and system in our society. We cannot truly make progress until we acknowledge these truths. I know that you all make tweaks to impact each year, but I'm curious, are we planning for a large scale review here of performance? I am not opposed to performance evaluation systems, I will say that. But this keeps coming up. We keep sort of nibbling at the edges. Is it, you feel like you need to get through this contract before you could talk about a overhaul of impact, or like, what's the process here? Because I think you all are acknowledging we've got some gaps in the assessment, but we're continuing to use the assessment in which.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I appreciate the way you framed it. So I think the process that we follow is refining the tool. There's certainly significant benefits and upside to the tool that we use. So we don't want to throw the tool out because there's certainly impacts that we felt with student achievement that we want to maintain. However, if you highlighted, there are opportunities to improve it, and we've done that. And we've seen most recently that we've been able to retain a high level of teachers of color. And we also have seen some increases in their performances in the way they've been evaluated. But to address some of the issues that you've highlighted, one, I want to be clear that training for our evaluators has been an essential part of the way that we want to address this, and one of our first steps. So in addition to our anti-racist educator and administrator training, we've also partnered with the National Institute of Race and Equity to provide training that helps support this effort. We've also looked at a number of the requests that came from our teachers in the WTU that we followed on. So for example, we no longer apply salary step holds for teachers who are receiving development ratings, which was a recommendation from members and teachers. We have been implementing implicit bias training for our evaluators as well. And there's just a number of ways in which we've modified our rubrics. So there has been—
Do principals get that training too? Because principals are evaluators and impact.
Yeah, they are evaluators and they get that training.
Okay. One of the things that I guess—
And to be clear, principals and assistant principals, when we talk about evaluators.
Right. Because I think there's lots of anecdotes, right? We can all find a story for a particular situation, but I wanted to ensure that we're not just talking about the master educators as the evaluate just receiving this training, but also principals and assistant principals and instructional superintendents who all participate in the evaluation process as well.
Correct. Everyone that's an evaluator is a part of that process.
So when you received this memo, what were your thoughts?
It was, eye-opening. We had heard that, some teachers felt like there were some biases in the way in which they're being evaluated. There were some disconnects, but there were some connections that we were able to make. But I think it's important for our evaluators, who are majority, educators and administrators of color, to also self-examine their own biases as they evaluate employees of color. Because I think oftentimes when you are a person of color, it is perceived that you can be exempt from biases that are racially based. And what we had to help our evaluators, and especially all of our administrators of colors, understand that these outcomes are driven by your actions and behaviors. And we know that many of you are administrators of color. And so we need to do a step back on our own biases to ensure that they're not a part of the evaluation process. We also need to ensure that we calibrate the way we expect and evaluate our employees to ensure that it is bias-free.
But it's not just on race, though. I mean, I like looking at 63% of white teachers are aged between 21 and 35 in comparison to 40% of Black teachers, right? So that strikes me as there's also, I think, maybe some generational conversations that need to happen there as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the heart of what we started with is some of our discrepancies in data for race, but we also have covered multiple dimensions of bias outside of race, whether that be age, culture, gender. We want to ensure that all of those are addressed in our training. And it's something that we evaluate when we look at our teacher evaluation data to ensure that we're able to look for and have on our radar any data trends that would represent that we haven't addressed those areas.
Okay, I know I'm out of time. I would just say this, Chancellor, when I look at something like this, I wouldn't have thought, okay, we just need to improve our training, but that perhaps we need a wholesale reevaluation of the system.
Yeah, so again, there have been other areas outside of training, such as the way we observe, the way in which we apply the rubric, adjustments to the rubric, also looking at value-added data. I think growth data oftentimes can be a consideration in terms of student achievement and performance. And then also, we were very careful to consider the impact of the pandemic during the years in which we were directly impacted with testing or instructional time. But we're not done. So we're in the spirit of continuous improvement. We know that this is an ongoing process of continuing to improve the tool. But while we spend a lot of time talking about the gaps, I do think it's important to recognize some of the benefits that DCPS has seen as a result of the impact performance system as well.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chancellor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. So I have several questions regarding impact. At our first hearing on teacher turnover, which was in 2019, Chancellor, you stated, quote, "I am committed to taking a fresh look at how we can update our performance evaluation system to ensure we are supporting all educators in all 8 wards through a comprehensive review of impact," unquote. And then in its report last year, AU found that, quote, "overall perceptions of impact were more negative than positive," unquote, and impact was found to have a racial bias. DCPS said it was embarking on a process to revise impact. Where is DCPS in that process? What have you done to change impact since the AU report?
Yeah, so I've highlighted several of the adjustments, but I do think it's important to provide context, Chairman, on the AU research. So the AU research centered around the perceptions of 46 teachers who were accepted to do interviews and focus groups around impact and the way we could improve. So I just wanted to be clear that it doesn't cover a wide range of perceptions from our teachers. Also, I think it's important to note that when we look at the overall satisfaction of impact, that 92% of our teachers that are Black teachers were effective or highly effective, and many of which have reported positive perceptions of impact. So I want to be clear that there are positive perceptions of impact, but you heard me share some of our reactions to the research from AU earlier as it relates to our training, also our reflective practices with teachers, the way in which we've modified our rubrics, and the way that we calculate results for teachers. All of that has been adjusted since we received the results back from the study with AU.
What do you mean by rubrics? We modified rubrics.
Yeah, so there are various ratings that you can apply in evaluating the teacher's performance. So there may be a level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and there's a description of what we are looking for in each of those levels. That would be a part of the rubric that we apply, which go across various areas in which we're evaluating teachers on. We've made adjustments there. We've also reduced the weight of the value-added component of teacher evaluation, which was at 35%. Now that is at 25%. So those are just some examples. And again, those are things that we heard directly from teachers in our engagement. And outside of the AU research study, we had an opportunity to engage over, I believe it's over 4,000 stakeholders in that process. So we've done extensive feedback gathering as well, in addition to the research that was done by AU.
And all this was done since last year? The AU?
Yes. Yeah, so once the AU report was released, we started on this journey, and we've been on this journey over the last 2 years in terms of our updates and where we made adjustments to the tool.
So then why is it that last week's hearing, so many teachers testified that there's been no change to impact?
Yeah, I can't explain that. We've been very clear. We have provided updates to the Washington Teaching Union every time there's been an adjustment to impact. So they should be well versed. And we also send a communication out to all of our teachers as well. So I believe that's just, a misrepresentation of where we are and the work that we've done.
Would you provide us with a copy of that communication to the teachers?
Sure, we're happy to provide you with the communications that we provided.
Okay, and
to be clear, we've made changes for both the 21-22 school year and the 22-23 school year that we're in currently.
That's fine. I'm interested in both because the perception is that there's been no change. So you mentioned value added. DCPS continues to use value added measures in measuring teacher effectiveness through impact. Values added measures have been invalidated by the American Statistical Association, as it's not statistically possible to isolate the effect of the effect on one teacher of test score growth from other factors, to isolate the one from other factors like the impact of other teachers that the students have at the same time, or from other factors like home. Will you remove value added from ELA and math teacher evaluations? Why or why not?
So we think value added does has a place in terms of determining teacher impact. There always will be external factors contributing to student understanding and mastery outside of the classroom, but we also believe that there's a lot of research that we could present that also supports the use of value added data as a part of a performance evaluation. So we're happy to provide that research if you're interested. But we believe it's an important piece of our monitoring of student achievement and ensuring that we are having an impact on student achievement. But it's not the only thing we look at. So again, I want to reiterate that there's multiple areas in which we evaluate as a part of the performance measurement system.
Yes, but it's 25%, 1/4 of the evaluation.
Yeah, which means
And-
that other factors are 75%, which would be the majority of the performance measurement system.
But I'm a teacher and I'm being held accountable for my students' lack of growth when there's all kinds of trauma going on in my students' homes or in their neighborhoods.
Yeah,
That's kind
well,
of tough to hold against me.
yeah, well, it's a good point, Chairman, but I think our teachers and myself, and I know I've heard from you on many occasions that you expect our students to gain ground academically, socially, emotionally, regardless of the situations that they may have at home. And so we're very sympathetic to some of those challenges, and we're sensitive to those challenges, but we also know that students need to realize at least a year's growth annually, and we need to be held accountable to that. But now, to be clear, also, as we talk about value added, it only applies to a small portion of our teachers. Only 15% of our teachers have value added data that is calculated. And we also know that, again, that there's many factors that we need to consider, socioeconomic status and the like. But again, this is a small percentage of teachers, and this is not the majority of their performance measurement. As it's calculated, the majority would be the other 75%, which would include other indicators of success.
Who are the 15%?
The 15% would be grade levels where there is year-over-year data with our PARC assessment. I can provide that information for you. I'll have our team confirm, but I believe that's grades 4 through 10 in content areas of math and reading.
How many teachers were fired due to impact last year?
Oh, well, when you say due to impact, what do you mean? I'm not following.
Well, I forget the exact terminology for the lowest performing under impact, but we're fired because of that.
Yeah, so we have about 1% of our teachers that did not meet our standards as a part of our performance measurement system that were exited from DCPS.
So your answer is 1%.
Correct. Approximately, to be exact, it was 1.4%, which would equate about 60 teachers.
Can you provide a racial breakdown for us?
Sure, we can.
Okay. I often hear complaints that teachers who get crossways with their principals are punished through impact. For example, a teacher is consistently rated as highly effective and then is rated as effective or even developing. Perhaps this is anecdotal, or perhaps DCPS should look at departed teachers to see not only their most recent rating, but their rating for the several years prior. Does DCPS do this?
And so we look at all of our data points from a racial lens, but I want to also be clear that anytime a teacher feels like there's been unfair practices as part of their evaluation, they can always report that. It's something we investigate. And we want to be sure that teachers have a fair experience as they're evaluated in DCPS. But it is again very rarely that teachers who are highly effective have a shift from highly effective to below effective, which is what I believe you were alluding to.
Yeah,
But again,
I hear it all the time, and I acknowledge it might be anecdotal, but my question is, why doesn't DCPS look at departed teachers to see not only their most recent rating, but their rating for the several years prior?
Yeah, so we do look at the profile of the people that have left as a part of their standards and evaluation, but we don't see any particular trends at this point that would imply that teachers are moving significantly across one level to the other. But again, we rely heavily on the formal appeal process, and there are people who do submit appeals, and we uphold their appeals based on the information provided. And sometimes we don't, but we want to make sure that teachers know that that exists. Anyone that is evaluated in DCPS, if they're not a teacher, we want them to know that they're certainly going to be treated fairly, and they have access to appeals if they feel like they're not being treated fairly.
Sure, but this is a hearing on turnover, and what DCPS has said at this hearing and at previous hearings on turnover is that X number of teachers who left were developing. And so this question tries to look behind that. Well, were they just developing this year, or maybe they were really good teachers 3-4 years ago for a couple of years running, and then suddenly they're developing? That's a more refined analysis at what's going on with teachers leaving the system. So I'm going to take it from your answer that DCPS does not look at the history of departed teachers and look to see to what extent teachers are leaving who are developing or effective, but were rated much higher earlier.
Yeah, the trends that we've seen is that teachers who are below our standard typically have struggled over time, and it is not a new issue for that individual that's being evaluated. I think what you're implying is that a teacher is high performing one year and not so much the next, or maybe developing and below standard, and we don't see those types of quick shifts year over year. We do see that teachers who have not met our standard and need to be exited from the organization have typically struggled over a period of time.
Well, let me just be clear. I'm hearing that DCPS doesn't really look. Now I'm over my time, so I'm going to turn to Councilmember Henderson, and then I'll have another round.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Chancellor, I wanted to turn talking about some of the solutions to reasons or some of the solutions and things that we can put in place to address why some educators are choosing to leave the classroom. During the public witness testimony, we heard a lot about this idea of flexible scheduling. My understanding is that with the support of XQ, that there are 25 schools in the district, both DCPS and charter, who are trying a variety of different things around this idea of how do we provide a little bit more flexibility to teachers and staff. I think I tried to ask Mr. Pinder about this during the last one, but he didn't acknowledge that any of the DCPS schools were participating. To your knowledge, are any of the DCPS schools participating?
Participating, when you say participating, I want to make sure that,
Participating in that you are piloting in this period of time a couple of new type of schedule, like you're allowing a few campuses to try out some new type of flexible scheduling ideas.
yeah. So all of our schools are empowered as a part of our budget development process to structure their day for maximum teacher flexibility and planning. We have seen schools get creative with ensuring that there's common planning time for teachers that may teach the same content area or grade level. We also, as you mentioned, have the partnership with DCXQ, which allows for us to have greater innovation in our high schools and reimagine the high school experience, which we would anticipate would also add additional flexibility. I think the challenge that we have been under, and we're also partnering with, city leaders and others, and we've had some cross-sector conversation with our public charter schools as well, to look as a city, what might we explore and what resources might be needed. But there are a couple of schools that are dabbling in it, I would say, around the edges, but I wouldn't say they're deep into the work. What I think the greatest challenge is maintaining instructional time for students. Because we know, and we've seen in the data, it's extremely clear that there's no substitute for in-person learning, right? We agree on that. So we don't want to create structures in which, yes, is more flexible for the teacher, but the student in the classroom gets less in-person instruction.
Right. But if I have a burnt out teacher in front of me, they are no more effective than someone who had time to prepare a lesson to deliver it to me effectively. Yes?
I think it's a balance. I think we know that students need direct instruction. And I think that's the expectation for most parents, right? I think most parents expect that their student is going to get the appropriate amount of instructional time daily and weekly. And so I think we're still trying to make sure that there's a balance there and students having access to their instructional time, but also giving greater flexibility when we can.
So let's talk about parents, actually new parents, in fact, because I think in some of the previous data pre-pandemic, one of the other concerns that came up in terms of people who might have been choosing to exit DCPS and charter schools, right? We don't have the benefit of having some of the charter LEAs here, was around they're now about to start their family and either paid parental leave was not sufficiently offered, something that we worked on in district government, right? We're about to do the 12 weeks, but also the transition back into the classroom after your leave is over, and how the system doesn't necessarily make that as an inviting and seamless process as possible. I'll give you an example. One of my neighbors is a teacher. She just had a kid. After she was sort of at the end part of her leave, and our kids go to the same school, and I saw her walking up and she said, "Oh, I'm heading over to my school in a little bit." And I was like, "I thought your leave wasn't over." And she said, "Yeah, but I realized that I need to clean out a closet in the classroom so that I have some place to pump when I go back." And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I have an office with a door. The Wilson building also has, a place for, parents who are breastfeeding, et cetera, to take care of that. That doesn't require them to do it in a closet. But here we have a teacher who's literally is like, "Oh no, I have to go in early to like clear a space in a closet for that type of thing." And so one of the things I think, or suggestions that someone offered was around, is there a way to on-ramp? So you're not coming back and doing 100% of your teaching in those first 2 to 3 to 4 weeks that you're back, to allow new parents to adjust and not feel like I can't do it both, so I'm just going to pay attention to my own kid. And then we lost an educator in the process.
Yeah, it's a great point. So to be clear, with new mothers and breastfeeding, we want to ensure that they have access to appropriate space. the challenge is some of our schools have more space than others, depending on the capacity, but certainly in all of our service buildings and where we have space, we always provide adequate space and lactation rooms for new mothers. But what you're highlighting, I think, is a need for us to continue to look at job sharing. Is something that I'm interested in. I think there could be scenarios in which you might have two teachers assigned to a group of students or a class or a grade level. And there could be some sharing of time among those two teachers or multiple teachers, which would give someone in the scenario you described greater flexibility, and maybe they're not under a 5-day week schedule, they're on a rotation of some sort. I think that will require us to bargain with the Washington Teachers Union or over those types of structures.
You're at the table now. Look at that. This is a perfect opportunity.
We're happy to do that. I think our focus has been, as I said earlier, on the health and safety MOAs that we spent a lot of time negotiation, and then the compensation and benefits that we've recently been working on. But I remain open. I think if the Washington Teachers Union wants to negotiate that, we're happy to. But as of right now, we follow all the district lead policies for any other type of lead. But I think, some type of job sharing structure is something that I'm interested in, and if they're interested in.
Right. I will say this, right? I think, at least from reading some of the story, the anecdotes or the quotes, it's not compensation, right? For some people, it's not. It's literally, do I feel like I can live my life and do my job and not feel like I'm sucking at both of them?
Yeah.
And I totally understand. I get that. Like, I totally understand that. And I recognize that there are some jobs that provide more flexibility for others. I think instruction, in-person instruction, having qualified teachers, all of that is super important. But in certain cases, where we have employees who are making life transitions, if the job can respond to that life transition without compromising student achievement and growth at the same time, I think we got to start thinking outside of the box and being a bit more creative, especially when you look at the age of your workforce and the age at which people will choose to leave. Right? Like, if we look at the data, and folks are like hardcore with DCPS from like 25 to 32, and then they're like deuces. And then there's a gap in those 30s, and then you see a bunch, I think that might be telling.
Yeah, I agree. I think we should continue to explore creativity around our workforce. I'm extremely grateful and appreciative of the work of our teachers. And we wouldn't be able to achieve what we've been able to accomplish without the work of our teachers, right? It's great. But at the same time, I also want to continue to deliver on those results. And so I'm open to structures that value the work of our teachers and their needs and their life outside of the classroom, but also ensuring that our students also get what they need.
Okay. I don't have enough time to get another question off. Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, I'll give you another round. Let me just say that I want to echo what I heard from Councilmember Henderson about supporting more effort on the part of DCPS to look at flexible scheduling. So at last week's hearing, there was a witness who testified, and I quote, "We also need to stop the over-testing. A second grader in DCPS must take 3 different literacy assessments at the beginning of the year, at the middle of the year, and then again at the end of the year. This does not include mid-unit assessments, end-of-unit assessments, the controversial RCTs, and Foundations, our phonics program, assessments. This 7 or 8-year-old child must repeat these assessments 3 times a year, and that is only for one subject. There are also separate assessments for social studies, math, and science. Testing grades, meaning 3rd and up, must take these school-based assessments as well as the park and ANET assessments. We are losing valuable instructional time because the students are constantly and unnecessarily being assessed. Each time an assessment is taking place, that means the student is not learning. We all lose at least one day of actual learning, and that is if the test is implemented within the whole group. Many of these assessments require a teacher to sit with one-on-one with a student. The amount of time teachers and students spend assessing is preposterous. Why so much testing? It takes away from classroom time to teach curriculum. This is my question to you. It seems to be pushing educators to a breaking point. Many teachers are talking about working 10 to 12-hour days and on weekends, and noting the data entry needed for the RCTs is a big part of it. Why so much testing? What will DCPS do to reduce the amount of time being spent on testing?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Chairman. We talked about this before. Again, I recognize the demands of assessing where our students are and the tremendous work that teachers have done to help us monitor where students are in terms of their understanding and mastery and proficiency with concepts. But as you know, we lost tremendous ground when we had extended period of remote learning. And now more so than ever, I think you agree, it's important to know where our students are academically, socially, and emotionally throughout the school year, and it supports a multi-tier system of support. So we know how to intervene, we know what interventions need to be deployed. That's critical to how we improve from where we are and ensure that students are prepared for college and career. Now, in response to the feedback that we received from teachers, we have made some adjustments. We eliminated an assessment called TRC. We made some adjustments to the RCTs. We reduced the number of RCTs. We also made our SAGE and MAP assessments, which are science and social studies assessment, optional as well. So we tried to strike the balance of where we could make some adjustments, but also continue to have access to the critical data we need to inform our instruction and interventions, especially knowing that we lost some ground with remote learning that we experienced.
I'm not sure how to follow up, and I hesitate to follow up with this analogy.
Could I go back for a second? So on the flexible schedule, I want to be clear that that wasn't brought to us in the collective bargaining conversations, but I remain open to that. And we have also, I failed to mention earlier, partner with Education Resource Strategies, which is, expert in the field of how to creatively utilize resources that can help us with scheduling, potentially flexible scheduling. So I just want to reiterate my interest in that.
Well, this is a hearing on teacher principal turnover, and it was pretty clear from the hearing last week that flexible scheduling is one step that DCPS could take that would make a big difference, and the charters could take as well, that would make a big difference. The biggest being the contract and impact and flexible scheduling and the testing. The takeaway for me from the hearing last week is that teachers, unlike a lot of agency employees across the government, really want to do what they're doing, which is teaching. And they get frustrated in so many ways. And one of the ways they get frustrated is so much testing. So I'm about to use an analogy or metaphor or something that I shouldn't use, but I am. And that is that when I'm cooking something in the oven, I can keep opening the oven door to see how it's cooking because I am interested in it cooking. But as everyone knows, if you keep opening the oven door, it's going to take longer to cook, and you're taken away from that. So yeah, I want to know whether Johnny is progressing with his reading and whether he did well in August and then again in September and again in October, but maybe that's getting in the way of teaching. The teachers are surely frustrated by this. And what we really need to know, what we really, really need to know is that at the end of the school year, Johnny's actually progressed with his reading. So You said you
Yeah,
eliminated the
it's-
TRC, you reduced the RCTs, you didn't eliminate them. You made some assessments in social studies, et cetera, optional, but you're still defending so many tests.
Yeah, I think, looking back and thinking about your analogy, I think the challenge, Chairman, that we're trying to balance is if we wait to the end of the year, we haven't had an opportunity to intervene. And that child has missed the entire school year with missed opportunities for interventions. And a part of the teacher and learning process is so iterative and it evolves so quickly that we need to know where students are so we can intervene and provide support. So I don't think, parents would want us to just simply wait to the end of the year to see if things are okay. I think they want us to know where their students are. And when we have conferences with teachers and parents in our parent teacher conferences, parents want to know where their children are. They want to know how they're performing. I know I wanted to know that as a parent. I think you may have as well. And so I think having the ability to speak in great detail about where students are and what they need is important. And I don't think we can wait to the end of the year to do that.
Well, maybe, maybe, but as I remember, I think I had parent-teacher conferences twice a year. And let me see, literacy assessments are 3 times a year. I think the RCTs were once a week. So when you say you want to know if, we want to know if the student's making progress, so we know whether we need to intervene, who's the we? The teacher or central administration?
So the school coordinates all of the interventions and we support them.
Okay.
But I want to be clear on the
No, please let me. So
Okay.
then is the we want to know the teacher or the principal?
So we want to know is all the above. We want the teacher to have the information. We want the student to have the information. We want the school to have the information and also
Okay,
administration.
I'm going
as
to
a-
interrupt you again. But if the teacher is good, isn't the teacher going to have a sense on a day-to-day basis whether Johnny is learning to read or is picking up the math? Does the teacher need a test to know that Johnny isn't getting the coursework or that Johnny's getting the coursework? My recollection is that when my daughter was in school, the teacher had a pretty good idea whether my daughter understood the coursework without the test.
Yeah, so to be clear, when we talk about tests, there was some way in which the teacher may have hopefully assessed where your daughter was to know what she might need and what supports may be needed. The RCTs, again, let me dig into what are RCTs. So these are curricular tasks. These aren't tests. These are tasks that we have designed that students should be able to do at the end of a lesson or a series of lessons on a particular standard. And I think that's reasonable.
The
I think
RCTs came out of the pandemic and virtual learning, correct?
we started the RCTs during that time period.
Yeah, because it was a bit of a mystery whether kids who you never saw in the classroom because there were no classrooms, whether the kids were actually learning. So the RCTs were a strategy to try to assess what's going on.
Yeah, I don't think it was a pandemic strategy. I think it's an acknowledgement that we need to better understand what our students are doing, what they're capable of, and if they're proficient on specific tasks. And I think it's reasonable if you've had a lesson on fractions and decimals to have a few tasks that you would ask students to complete to determine whether or not they understand that concept. I think that's fair.
So let me just say, I'm not a trained educator, and it just crossed my mind that here I am as the chair of the council and chair of the oversight committee, suggesting that you, Chancellor, who's much more knowledgeable about education, are testing too much. But then what goes across my mind is this. I had a room full of educators last week, not for the first time, saying there is too much testing. It's the teachers who are saying there's too much testing, not me. It's the teachers, and it's driving them crazy. And it is, they say, one of the factors that's contributing to turnover because they're not happy with their job. Now, Maybe I got that wrong, but I think I got that right. Councilmember Henderson?
Can I jump in on this convo just to say, because I think whenever the original, I can't remember, days or weeks is all running together right now. But one of the teachers who testified was, kind of said it, I can't believe they're even testing pre-K students. And I was like, nobody's actually testing pre-K students. As in having a pre-K student sit at a desk and bubble in a Scantron, but new pre-K 3 parent, when I had my first parent teacher conference, they had a little progress report that said Jordan, X was able to identify X number out of 26 letters, capitalized, lowercase. We counted this many numbers, we did this many colors. And I think it was helpful for me to have that. Now, what I imagine as the quote unquote assessment or test that people is that her teacher did a pull aside and had like a one-on-one sort of engagement to determine, okay, do you know all your ABCs? Do you know your 1, 2, 3s? But I feel like, I don't know, maybe when she gets to the 6th grade, I'll think that this is corny. But for right now at pre-K, that was actually quite helpful in terms of where we needed to work on. But Chancellor,
I'm glad you get, I have just a few seconds.
Yep.
What you just described is essential to parent school partnership, because you have to have information that informs where students are, that drives what happened at school, and then also how parents and guardians can support that at home. And not having that, I think, is too risky. And having consistency in that is also important as well.
Right, but I think it's to maybe where the chairman was going is like part of it is part of the feedback loop, right? So not every, well, let's go back. Let me go back to what my original question was. You keep saying RCT, and sure, there might be some people who are listening on this hearing who knows what that means, but can you just what does that mean?
So they're called required curricular tasks. And again, they're not tests, they're not bubbling in anything. It's not they're tasks that you would complete at the end of a lesson. So say, for example, you are doing a lesson on how to convert fractions to decimals. Okay. Once you've completed your lessons on that topic, there may be 3 tasks that the student in the 4th grade class, we asked them to complete to show evidence that they've mastered that particular topic. And if they haven't mastered that particular topic, we then have a set of interventions that we've curated that a teacher can utilize to help the students with those particular concepts.
Okay, so someone described it as, because I said, oh, this kind of sounds like when we were in school, the little chapter end of unit test that they would be in the textbook at the end of the chapter. But it's not really that, and it's not an exit ticket. So right?
It could be along the, I would say,
like how long
how long
should it take?
Yeah, they're relatively short. It would be, they're closer to I would say the ticket out of door strategy than it is the questions you might get at the end of a chapter in a math book.
But you require for each of these that the teachers have to upload it into some system, right? So it's not even just for their knowledge. They let's say I administer it to the students. Me, teacher, I have that knowledge, but now I have to sit down and manually update, do some data entry.
Yeah, so
I think is probably
there may be some entry of that information, but again, that is designed to help schools and help schools be responsive. But they're designed not to take up like multiple class period. They're designed to be done within the class period, and they're designed in such a way that we can utilize that data to help teachers and help schools be responsive to student needs.
Right,
And
but
oftentimes,
it's not the loss of instruction time, right? I think there are folks who talk about testing who have that argument on that front, because this doesn't sound like that. But I could see if I'm giving 8 to 12, if I'm required to do 8 to 12 RCTs in a academic year, and let's say I am at a high school, so I have to do that for each of my classes, and then I have to sit there for the 60 students that I have across 4 class periods and type those. I would find that to be.
yeah, that's not how it is. So most of the RCTs have an electronic component which allows the teachers to score it quickly. So the assessment that you just described for Jordan in the pre-K classroom, teachers teach, I mean, that's point and click with devices. So it is not, you take the test, a lot of transfer of data. It can be done very quickly.
If you all just introduced this during the pandemic, I'm assuming you're going to do some review.
Actually, we refined it, but the notion of task to determine mastery was before the pandemic. We refined it to ensure that we were able to get a clearer glimpse of misunderstandings to be responsive. But this is not something that we've just done in the last year or two or so.
Okay, so when we talk about testing, though, right, I think one of the things that is, I've also talked to Superintendent Grant about this, and she will say, no, council member, the only thing that we require is the park assessment. Like, that's the statewide assessment. That is the only thing that is required by law. And then, we do the NAEP, we do our part on the NAEP portion. Any other assessments are coming from LEAs. So when we are hearing from teachers, whether it be charter LEAs, et cetera, this is a decision that you can make if you wanted to streamline the number of assessments that were occurring in a school building over the course of a school year. Have you all done just like a count?
Yeah, so that is accurate. We administer formative assessments throughout the year, are much shorter in time and task and duration than the park, right? The park takes an extensive amount of time, and that is, of course, administered by the Office of State Superintendent of Education in alignment with federal requirements. We have looked at the volume and the number and the times of year in which they're implemented, and we have made adjustments. And I spoke to those changes where we made with RCTs, eliminated some assessments and made some optional. We'll continue to look at that. We'll continue to evaluate that on an ongoing basis. What I was trying to highlight is the value of assessments and having formal assessment in real-time data throughout the year so we can be responsive to student needs and provide intervention. And we've invested a lot of, it's interesting because we've had a lot of conversation and hearings about, well, what did you do with your ESSER dollar? Are students getting access to high dose tutoring? Well, you actually need information to inform those things and to know students, right? You have to have data to inform those strategies.
But okay, and I hate that I'm about to say this because I hate when people are like, when I was in school, but like when we were in school, we didn't have our CTs. Our teachers would evaluate our mastery of the subject either via an end of unit test or a test on the book we were reading or the math concepts at the end of whatever it was, right? And so I can maybe imagine some of the frustration here that a teacher is saying, I know, right? So I'm going to give my own test on the book unit that we just did because I need to know that. But then I also have central office telling me I have to do these required curricular tasks as well.
Yeah, I think
it comes across a little like y'all are now not just helicopter, y'all are the Velcro parents that they talk about in undergrad.
Yeah, I think you're referencing a different era where there was this idea, yeah, you know that you know, and we figured out we didn't know, right? And there's there's a lot that has transpired since those times. And I'm confident that our assessments are reasonable and they provide us the best opportunity to support our students. Is it something that we need to look at regularly and reflect upon? Absolutely. Will we streamline those when we can? Absolutely. But I know you do, as I do, have tremendous sense of accountability to ensure that our students are prepared for college and career. And the stakes and the bar for us to do that are high. And we know that our students did lose some ground during the pandemic. And so I think we've got to stay the course, but do it reasonably. And I think what we have before our teachers in terms of how we assess learning is reasonable, but it's something I'm continually interested in learning from our teachers where they experience pain points. But the last thing I'll say is I think when we say teachers, I think we are taking accounts from individuals or a few individuals and interpreting that is the general consensus among teachers. I have talked to teachers regularly. We recently had our standing ovation celebration of teachers last week. Multiple teachers say, this has been very valuable. It helps me be better in my classroom. And so I just want to be sure that we level set and that there are people who find a lot of value in some of the strategies that we've been discussing today and appreciate them.
Right. I certainly wouldn't suggest that every person who comes to testify before the council is representative of the whole. Not anyone is monolithic, not any industry. So not every DCPS teacher is monolithic in terms of how they view impact, how they view testing, how they view all the things. But it would also be negligent of us to just dismiss the concerns of people who took time to come and testify, to share their experiences and otherwise. And not even just those who come to testify, but, anecdotally in terms of those conversations. Chancellor, I appreciate the conversation. And Mr. Chairman, I'm wrapping up because I have to go do pickup, but I do want to ask, just as a follow-up, Chancellor, that you said you do review the volume. If you could just provide a number for average number of assessments, and I'm not talking about observations, but assessments that students or teachers are administering in a school year for each of the grade bands, would be helpful to know.
We'll take a look at that. Thank you. And again, not dismissing what you've heard. I just want to make sure when we talk about teachers that we understand that there's a very diverse landscape of perceptions. Thank you.
Well, Chancellor, do you disagree with what I read earlier? I'm quoting from a teacher who testified. A second grader in DCPS must take 3 different literacy assessments at the beginning of the year, at the middle of the year, and then again at the end of the year. This does not include mid-unit assessments, end-of-unit assessments, the controversial RCTs, and Foundations, our phonics program assessments. This 7 or 8-year-old child must repeat these assessments 3 times a year, and that is only for one subject. There are also separate assessments for social studies, math, and science. Testing grades, meaning 3rd and up, must take these school-based assessments as well as the PARCC and ANET assessments. We are losing valuable instruction time because students are constantly being assessed. Each time an assessment is taking place, that means the student is not learning. We all lose at least 1 day of actual learning, and that is if the test is implemented within the whole group. Many of these assessments require a teacher to sit one-on-one with a student. Do you disagree? Is that inaccurate? Is that false?
Yeah, there's some assessments that were referenced that I'm not necessarily tracking, but I do agree with the overall arching view that there are beginning of year, middle of year, end of year assessments. And there are assessments for different content areas, some of which we've made optional, some are required. But in terms of like mid-unit, some of the assessments that you mentioned, I'm not tracking all of those. But as I shared with Councilmember Henderson, we'll be happy to continue to look at that. We're happy to have conversations with teachers and understand more on where they feel like that can be streamlined. And
So-
also to be clear, foundations is not an assessment, it's a curriculum. So again, I'm just, again, not tracking all of those.
So we had a hearing last week. There were 99 witnesses who signed up. A lot of them were teachers. There wasn't one teacher who came in and said, thank goodness for this testing because it's helped me so much. There wasn't a single teacher who said that. But there were, I'd have to look back and see if it was all of the teachers. There were a lot of teachers who complained about too much testing. And I've been hearing that for a long time. And these are educators. So presumably they know something about what they're talking about in terms of teaching. And I go back to what I said before. Yes, I want to know, as a parent, I want to know each time I have a parent-teacher conference. As a legislator with oversight here, I want to know at the end of the year. But do we really need to keep opening the oven door on a weekly basis to find out how the cook is cooking? I
Yeah.
trust a teacher to have a sense of whether Johnny is learning. And if she thinks Johnny's got some issue, then there would be some additional assessments to figure out maybe there's a reading disorder, maybe there's something going on. But I trust a teacher to have a pretty good sense of whether Johnny's picking up the coursework. Let me move on. I want to ask about universal exit survey. I have this comment. DCPS does conduct an annual exit survey. Not sure participation is very high. Do you have a universal exit survey for all departing teachers and principals?
Yes, we have an exit survey. I don't know that it is different from for teachers and principals, but it is not required, but we certainly welcome that feedback.
So what's the participation rate?
I don't have the participation rate by memory, but we'll get that information to you. I'll ask our team to provide that.
Do you do anything else to understand why teachers are leaving?
Yeah, so we have a number of opportunities where we host focus groups, and I also have a monthly meeting with my teacher advisory board as well. And this, as you can imagine, is always a topic that we discuss in those conversations to understand, what are the features of DCPS that are appreciated and should be lifted up and recognized, but also what our challenges are and how we might be responsive to those challenges.
This is monthly meetings with who?
I have a teacher advisory board, so it's representative of teachers across the district by grade level, school, ward, and the types of positions that they're in.
Do they ever complain about too much testing?
Not in a way that you've described it today, but we did get feedback last year about RCTs, and we responded and made some adjustment to RCTs. We haven't had it as a topic for this school year yet, but we will.
Who's in the focus groups?
Oh, I mean, we had focus groups around impact. We've had focus groups around a number of different topics. We typically ask for volunteers and identify teachers to be a part of those focus groups. We also have our insight survey that also we use to gather perceptions for teachers on a number of topics as well.
Well, these strike me as very indirect and not very good ways of measuring why teachers are leaving. Focus groups that may or may not focus on this might focus on, you said, like impact, and monthly meetings with teachers who are in the system, not leaving the system. So you have a universal exit survey. You're going to get back to with regard to the participation rate. why don't you share publicly on a comprehensive basis the exit survey data?
Say that again.
Why don't you share publicly on a comprehensive basis the exit survey data?
Well, that in many cases, I mean, it would be just the nature of the data that we're collecting. That's something I consider, but I also want to be sure that, you know, as we get confidential information or sensitive information, that we keep some of that information to be deliberative. But if there's information that we can share publicly, that is something I consider. But we do rely a lot on the panorama survey, a lot for insight.
On the what?
Panorama survey. So it is our survey that gives insight into working conditions. The insight survey I mentioned earlier also provides information on why teachers may be planning to leave. And typically, I would say 60 to 75% of our teachers take that survey. And we're happy to get you some of the data from those survey results as well. And then we also heard from over, I think, 1,400 people from our stakeholder sessions with our strategic planning process, which also included teachers.
60 to 70% of teachers participate in which survey?
The insight survey. And I believe that there are, if my memory serves me correctly, there are direct questions about reasons why a teacher may be planning to leave DCPS.
Insight is only about, are you planning to leave, or other things?
There are other things in the survey as well.
These also strike me as indirect measures. It's mysterious to me why the exit survey that you do is you're not willing to release on a comprehensive basis. So can't say, I didn't say on a school basis. So if one teacher leaves, let's say Watkins Elementary, that releasing the data on Watkins Elementary will reveal personal information about that teacher. I said on a comprehensive basis. I had an interesting conversation with the chief of police last week because I asked him about whether they do an exit survey, and they do an exit survey. They have a very high participation rate, and he shares that information. He also works with the union to get, he has two unions and works with the unions to get from them why police are leaving, retiring, resigning. I shouldn't say retiring, resigning. And if he sees something in particular, he said they do phone calls to a select number of officers to go more in depth why they're leaving. I'm not hearing any of that from you, but I am hearing you do a universal exit survey and you won't release it. This is, I think, very strange. And I think this is a key part of understanding turnover.
Yeah, I think it is. It's something that I will commit to exploring further. And my memory serves me correctly, most of the results are in narrative nature. And so we may consider restructuring the format so we can kind of have some more data that could be potentially shared publicly. But I'll think more about that. I think for me, though, it's a little bit different in the context because I do know that the majority of our high performers, teachers that are effective and highly effective, over 90% return back to DCPS. And so, you know, while this is an area of focus and is important, I also don't want to lose sight that we need to continue to do the work to retain the teachers that are highly effective in DCPS. And I believe we've done that well. And I think that's a good way that I try to balance, you know, some of these conversations that we're having today.
Well, you're making me relive some of the issues from last week's hearing. It's not just how many are leaving DCPS, it's how many are leaving a school. Because for the standpoint of a school, if they lose a teacher, even if they go to another school within DCPS, they've lost a teacher. And it's unstabling for that school. That's an important part of this. And I kind of want to know why teachers are moving around from school to school. Maybe they're unhappy with the school they're at or the principal. It's kind of hard to know what's behind the turnover if we have no exit data. And as I'm sitting here, I have no exit data other than the hearing last week, which is, as I said, CBA and impact and working conditions like flexible hours. So let me ask you about your
And one thought, I think,
HR office.
sometimes, a school from one school to the other is about, teacher need and desire. I think some teachers want to be closer to where they live or want to serve a particular student population they have affinity to. So
Are
I
you
know why that's
testifying that all the teachers move from one school to another because they want to be closer to where they live?
and I'm saying these are reasons that I've heard why.
Yeah, but I'd like to know, I'd
Right.
like to know more scientifically, and I think you should too.
Yeah, I hear you.
So I want to ask you about HR. You've been without a deputy chief of employee services since February. And in a letter to me dated last week, you said that DCPS has been engaged in a robust recruitment process for 9 months. I'm having a problem understanding that. And the reason why I'm focusing right now on HR is because I think that's also an important part of teacher retention or turnover. I will go on. You also said, we're working to ensure that the position is classified in a manner that will attract candidates. That tells me that it's not properly classified now, 9 months after it became vacant. What's going on here?
Well, we've interviewed several candidates, and we had intended to hire someone, but it didn't work out with that particular person that we were intended to hire. But the agency has been led by strong internal leadership, and we'll continue to have that as we look for the right person. But I've been very, very committed to a process where we are screening carefully and ensuring that we have the right person that is aligned to our needs. I also have asked our team to look at the entire division from top to bottom, from leadership and also other positions, because I believe that there are ways in which we could be restructured and potentially change the role of not only the leader, but also other positions within the division.
Well, from where I sit, this seems to me to be evolving into a crisis because, as you know, for several months, I've been discussing with you HR problems with processing FMLA leave, teachers not getting paid, retirement benefits not getting processed. How long has Anita Berry been interim deputy chief?
I don't have her exact dates when she started and when she's been interim, but she's been serving in an interim capacity since March.
Since March.
That is correct.
Okay. And I understand that you have something like 8 vacancies in the office right now.
I don't have the exact number of vacancies currently, but I can have our team check that information.
Well, you're budgeted for 36. And as of October 1st, you have 26. That's actually a difference of 10, not 8. Maybe I didn't qualify for graduating on math. As of October 1st, 26 employees worked for the employee services team. After October 1st, an additional 2 employees joined the team, making for a total of 28 current employees. Now you're trying to fill in with some temporaries and contract, but doesn't change the fact you've got 8 vacancies. You're budgeted for 36. Last year, you were budgeted for 37. So you've had the ability to fully hire. So not only do you have a vacancy in the chief position, but you also have 8 vacancies in the office. Why?
Well, several of those vacancies are not true vacancies because we've had a number of people that have been promoted. We've also had staff detailed over to support that division. But also, as you know, when there's a change in leader, oftentimes there's change in personnel. We've hired, as you said, contracted staff where we need to fill in those gaps. But I've also asked for accountability for our service. And there have been individuals that have not had the same interest in delivering on those standards. And so have decided to do other things, either in or outside DCPS. So we continue to hold ourselves to a high standard of service. We had unprecedented needs in this division. We had a significant number of more vacancies, as I mentioned earlier. We had a significant number increase of retirements. We had a significant number increase of leave requests as a result of the pandemic. So the level of work and tracking and monitoring and service has significantly shifted. And for some, that may have been too demanding, but we want to ensure that we have the best people that are serving in this capacity.
Well, I can't disagree with your desire to have the best people, but teachers are leaving the system. And even though you say that it's not that great a rate, the testimony from everyone else is that we lead the nation or nearly lead the nation in our turnover rate. And one of the first places I would look would be HR, if there are HR complaints, and we're getting a lot of HR complaints, which prior to 2022, I don't recall ever getting HR complaints about DCPS. So,
well, I think the work has shifted in the enormous responsibilities that we have that I just mentioned. But also, I agree. I think there are certainly opportunities for us to be better here. And what concerns me is not only teachers who have needs in these functions, but also we don't want to lose prospective teachers either due to any challenges in this process. And as I stated earlier, are looking to reorganize and change the roles and responsibilities of individuals so we are efficient and also effective in all of our operations related to HR functions.
In the letter, you were also asked to answer the question, does DCPS maintain a tracking system for employee inquiries to the Human Resources Office? And
yeah, we responded.
You said during the height of school year 2022-23, hiring season and school reopening, our team implemented a tracker that was used to monitor all outstanding employee issues across. That sounds like that's past tense. It also sounds like it was done for this year, like namely in the summer, that you had a tracker. But other than that, do you have a tracker now?
Yeah, we have a tracker now. We meet daily to review this tracker. We've had 126 inquiries that were into the tracker. Of those 126, 125 of those have been closed. There's one outstanding open right now that we're still investigating, but that has been our posture for some time, and it is still a part of our daily practices and will continue.
I would like this reconciled. You may have to get back to me on this. At the hearing last week, I asked Dr. Pinder from DCPS how many new teachers hired this year? And he said 402 new to DCPS. And I asked how many vacancies, and he said 149. But in your letter, October 31st, regarding HR, one of the questions we had was, what factors are contributing to this year's surge in complaints alleging the problems in DCPS HR? And part of your answer was, this year we saw 193 individuals submit DINRs, that's Declaration of Intent Not to Return. And help me here.
Well, as you,
No, wait, hold on. Similar this year, we had 551 people resign after the DINR window. So I took 551 and I added to that 193 and I got 744. But at the hearing last week, Dr. Pinder said there were 402 new hires and 149 vacancies, which totals 551. Now, I realize that the variables are slightly different. DNRs plus people resign after the DNIR window compared to new teachers hired plus number of current teacher vacancies. But still, the difference between 744 and 551 is large. Can you reconcile that?
I can't, I'm unfortunately not looking at the numbers that you're looking at. And so I would want to make sure that we're both looking at the same data set before I can respond.
Well, how about if you follow up the hearing by telling me how many teachers left DCPS, how many you've hired, and how many vacancies you have?
Yes, we will further clarify. I think, you know, some of the data that you're referencing is across employee groups, not just WTU, but yes, can clarify. But I do want to go, can I go back? I do want to go back to, because I did have our team do a quick review of the exit survey data on why people leave since 2016, 2017. So 27% was for relocation outside of the DC area. 14.3% was for work-life balance. 12.9% was retiring. 11.2% was school leadership. 9.4% was career change. 5% was impact. Other growth and leadership opportunities was 4.7, and behavioral management was 4.6. And we'll get you that data. And we'll continue to look at this as well.
All right, so you'll follow up and provide this in writing.
Yes.
Have all the problems with pay and FMLA requests been resolved? All of them?
Yes, with pay and FMLA. However, we were very creative with our services last year and the year before with providing additional opportunities for teachers and other staff to earn stipends. There's still some outstanding stipends that we've submitted documentation to OCFO, and they're working to ensure that people are paid. Those are the only areas in which I am aware of any outstanding pay.
How much student loan debt does the average DCPS educator hold?
Yeah, I don't have a line of sight into student loan debt for individuals that are employed at DCPS. We do support them with any forbearance or loan forgiveness that they may be eligible for. And we also support them with the documentation needed to apply for those benefits. But there's so many types of student loans that an individual may have, whether it's owned or operated by federal government, or they could be private loans as well. So I don't know all the landscape, but I will say that we are exploring DC specific benefits for student loan debt for educators that could potentially be a part of our strategy for recruitment and retention, among many other strategies that we're considering as well. The focus obviously has been on the collective bargaining agreement, but we're also exploring other opportunities to incentivize our teachers and to enhance our recruitment and retention strategies.
You said you're exploring forgiveness of DC specific debt?
So for example, in DC, that's specific to DC. So if you teach in DC, you may have additional opportunities for loan forgiveness, or maybe a portion of your loan is waived with DC resources, which will be different from the federal strategy.
Yeah, I'm not following you at all.
So say, for example, we might have an incentive that if you have student loan debt and you're teaching in DCPS, DC will commit to giving you $10,000 towards your student loan, as an example.
Okay. So that's exploring helping with the debt, regardless of the source of the debt.
Correct.
But you don't have any sense of what the average debt is or anything about it.
Yeah, I don't have a line of sight into our employees' debt.
Don't you think that would be helpful as a retention strategy to understand that the average teacher has X amount of debt or Y amount of debt? Maybe it's not very much, or maybe it's a lot, or maybe it's just the teachers who are new to the system, but you don't have any information about that.
Yeah, I would want to ensure that we had conversation with our legal team in our ability to ask very specific questions about individuals' finances. We do know that many graduates who are within, their first, 10 to 15 years in DCPS often have debt. And we also want to make sure that they have access to all the federal programs, because again, majority of our schools are Title I schools, and there are a plethora of benefits that they have based on their status as a teacher in DCPS in those schools.
Do you know how many teachers take advantage of the district's homebuyer assistance programs?
I believe we do have that number, but I will need to follow up with you in writing.
Okay, I hope somebody's taking notes here. And last week there was testimony that every school should have at least one substitute teacher assigned to it on a permanent basis. Why is this not done?
Yeah, some schools do. And we give schools the flexibility, again, how they structure their staffing. That's not an area where we determine there's a need to dictate resources there. So it'll be something that we continue to consider as we develop our budget model for fiscal year 24. But we are focused now on ensuring that we have the appropriate pool, so schools have access to substitutes when they need them. But some schools do prefer and utilize their resources to have a person on site. We ensure that there's a robust pool, and we also have access to contract substitutes as well.
So focused on ensuring that DCPS has an adequate pool means that you're still trying to hire more substitute teachers.
We're always hiring substitutes, always.
Okay. Substitute teachers are paid out of the school-wide line in DCPS, correct?
I will have to confirm that with our team.
Well, it's not paid for this by the school, it's paid for out of school-wide.
Yeah, it's not paid from the school. That is correct.
Okay. My question about why not assign at least one substitute teacher on a permanent basis to a school, it would be funded out of school-wide, not out of the school's budget itself.
Yeah, but then that would be reducing the dollars that are in the pool for potential substitute pool. So I don't know that that would meet the demand, because the number of substitutes needed do vary by schools. In our contracted substitute model, we are planning and exploring of having one contracted substitute per school. And that is something that, again, the school would not pay for.
Give me just a second here. Chancellor, did you have somebody taking notes on the items you were going to get back on?
Yes.
Okay. I thank you for being here today. I don't have any further questions today. You'll get back with the information you said you would get back with. So that's going to conclude this hearing. Hearing on teacher and principal turnover and retention in the district, as well as on Bill 24-355. The record will close at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, November 8th. I want to thank all the witnesses from last week and thank you, Chancellor, for today. The time is 5:39 p.m. and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, Chairman.
I thought I